West Pennsylvania is known for its beautiful farmlands and lakes, but in the early 1970s, this area became known for something else. An outbreak of UFO sightings that has never been rivaled. And coincidentally, something else made an appearance in the Pennsylvania woods. The two events established a link between UFOs and Bigfoot that had never been dreamed of.
How the events of 1973 unfolded pertaining to the Bigfoot outbreak was that I had received a call from a relative of this gentleman who had been the witness to this event. And what I learned was that on this particular night, this gentleman was shaving, and he was in the bathroom, he was cleaning up, and he turned around, and for whatever reason, he was looking at the window, and at the window were these two large glowing red eyes that were staring at him. And he was quite shocked. He turned around, knocked some things over, ran out into the other room to call some of the other family members, and they all smelled this unusual odor they described like rotten cucumber, a very strong odor. And it was very unusual enough to see these glowing eyes staring at him in the window, but when everybody went outside, and when I went there later and looked at the window, it was 8 feet off the ground. So what was it that was so tall that it was able to get its eyes up to that height?
Bigfoot, Yeti, Sasquatch. It's easy to dismiss the idea of a giant ape-like humanoid. It seems more cartoon than reality. But a series of events in Pennsylvania in 1973 changed a lot of people's minds about the existence of these creatures. What's even more intriguing is the evidence that suggests these creatures may come from another planet.
I was so scared. I was in the bathroom shaving.
Bigfoot researcher Stan Gordon interviewed the couple shortly after they reported the sighting. He was convinced of their sincerity and honesty. They had clearly experienced something terrifying.
Similar, and I didn't believe it.
As further proof of what they'd seen, they called in their son,
Come in here, please.
who claimed he'd seen a monster in the nearby woods.
Sometimes, and I didn't know what to make of it.
At first, the parents hadn't taken him seriously, but now it didn't seem so unlikely.
I don't know. I hope this Mr. Gordon can help us figure out what it was that's out in the woods. It's terrifying.
This particular sighting occurred outside of Greensburg, and this was the first event that we had, and it was the first of many, many reports that would happen over the next several months over a widespread area here in Pennsylvania.
The boy took Stan Gordon out to the woods, where he said he'd seen this monster. After a quick investigation of the area, Stan Gordon made a remarkable discovery: a fresh footprint. The boy said he'd been walking home, taking a shortcut through the brush, when he heard what he thought was a deer in the bushes. He threw some sticks into the bushes to try and flush the animal out. But what appeared was no deer. It was a creature, at least 8 feet tall, carrying a fence post. He stood over the boy, who was frozen in terror at what he was seeing. Apparently more curious than angry, the creature turned and walked off into the woods.
We have a track out in the woods. Oh, you have something back there?
For Stan Gordon, the footprint would be an important piece of evidence.
And this is the track that we found up there behind the hill. As you can see, it's three-toed. It's 13 inches long and 8 inches wide. And you can see the muscle tone, the bone structure in it. Very, very detailed track. Now, this one was colorized for television, but very intriguing because other locations turned up very similar tracks during that time, and even years later, very similar tracks have shown up throughout Pennsylvania and, in fact, other parts of the country as well. There were sightings being reported from 7 counties in southwest Pennsylvania, we also began to find that there apparently had been other sightings prior to this Greensburg report, but a lot of people were very reluctant to report it until they started hearing more people talking about it. And so this has been going on for a longer period of time than we had any idea of.
I was in the bathroom shaving.
For Stan Gordon and his team, the incident at Greensburg, Pennsylvania was just the beginning, and they had more questions than answers. Suddenly, there were so many reports of Bigfoot sightings, some from such credible witnesses that law enforcement officials had to take it seriously. Where were these creatures coming from? Stan Gordon's next investigation found a link that no one had anticipated.
One of those particular cases came in from about 50 miles from the Greensburg area up in Beaver County. And this particular case involved two teenage girls. They were in a rural area, and they were waiting for somebody to take them somewhere. They were waiting for a ride. And as they were standing there in this wooded area, this very large, hairy creature, man-like creature with long arms and covered with hair, walked across the road into the woods.
Do you see it?
The sighting of the creature was strange enough, but what they said was that the creature had in its one hand a small glowing sphere of light.
Dad! 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 Dad!
They talked to the one girl's father, and according to them, he went down into the woods, was down there for quite a while.
Hurry, Dad. In the woods, that way. Be careful.
While this was all going on, an object came across the sky, hovered over the area, and projected a beam of light down into that wooded area.
What is that? Oh my gosh.
So here again is something very intriguing. You've got a creature carrying a glowing sphere of light and some unusual object in the sky projecting a beam of light down in the same general area. And this began again as one of a number of cases we are to investigate that began to make us wonder what it was we were dealing with.
Dad! Come back!
According to one of the researchers that looked into the case and having talked with the two young women who were involved, apparently when the father went down on the woods, he was down there for a period of time. When he came up, he appeared to be somewhat shaken over the event. And when he came back out, he really didn't want to talk about it, and he basically said he didn't want anybody going down into those woods and that some things are better left alone. And it was actually the first case that I recall during that time where people reported both a UFO and a Bigfoot at the same place and time. In some other instances during this wave of sightings in '73, we, for example, in a particular area, we'd have a UFO sighting, and then sometimes within hours or days later, we'd have a Bigfoot show up and vice versa. But while it is very apparent that there are some in the Bigfoot field that don't want to hear about the UFO phenomenon being involved, and a lot of people with UFOs don't want to hear about the Bigfoot phenomenon being involved, that isn't our position. We got out to investigate these reports as the incidents were being reported, and this is what took place, and we're just documenting the information, trying to find the answers ourselves to what we're dealing with. Reports began to come in from a widespread area of sightings of these large, hairy Bigfoot-type creatures. And my phones in my home, my UFO control center, the operation center, was operated out of my house. And of course, all the people involved in my group were volunteers. And as more activity began to take place, more of these people began to spend day and night here answering the phones and working the radio communications center here to dispatch our investigators out. And it got to the point where there was so much going on, so much activity, that I took some time off from my full-time job where I was operating a small little electronics firm here locally to spend full time out in the field, just going out there to investigate these sightings firsthand. And I can tell you, if I hadn't been directly involved in this investigation myself, it'd be very hard for me to believe some of the events that were taking place.
Something unexplained is going on in the skies over the Hudson River Valley in New York State. Strange happenings torment those who drive its dark highways. Bizarre time-lapse experiences which are relived as nightmares. It's a place where contact with other worlds is as close as a trek in the nearby woods.
I was driving home at night, and my car just stalled. It's never done that before. Oh, God's sake. So I popped the hood and I got out, and I looked up and I saw this formation of lights. And I kept looking. It was actually this gigantic vessel. I couldn't hear it. I didn't know what it was. It was very odd. When I got home that night, I saw on the news that 3,000 people in the Hudson Valley had seen the same thing. Come on, when 3,000 people saw the same thing I did, it's more than just a coincidence.
The UFO corridor in Hudson Valley, New York, is famous for its connection to otherworldly phenomena. But it's not just the skies that bear watching here. Hudson Valley is home to a series of historic underground stone chambers and standing rocks. These structures summon the energy of unknown forces and leave many to ponder the existence of man in the universe and our relationship to time, past, present, and the future.
I was coming home from class one night and I had decided to take a shortcut in the woods back to my dorm. As I was walking, I noticed these two hooded figures carrying some kind of glowing ball that I had never seen before. As I went to get a closer look, I realized that they had noticed me. So I froze, I panicked, I had no idea what to do. And I just stood there, and as they came closer, the ball got brighter and brighter, and I was just transfixed by the lights like a deer in a headlight. And all of a sudden, I just collapsed. I was the only one there. They had gone, they had vanished, disappeared. I don't know what happened to them, but there wasn't a trace of them anywhere. It was just me all by myself in the middle of the woods.
Philip Imbrogno has studied the paranormal activity in the Hudson Valley, and in his book, Celtic Mysteries in New England, he explores the strange happenings around the stone chambers and standing rocks of the region.
The Hudson Valley in New York is filled with mysteries, from the Headless Horseman all the way to UFOs and strange Indian spirits. But one of the greatest mysteries are the stone chambers and standing stones that some feel are remnants of a lost civilization who explored the east coast of the United States thousands of years before Columbus. Here I am in front of one of the stone chambers, one of the many stone chambers in the Hudson Valley. This stone chamber is located on a property in Kent Cliffs in the Carmel area, and there's no coincidence that these stone chambers are centered around an area that has a great many reports of paranormal phenomena. And they're one of the greatest mysteries in the Northeast United States.
I was walking along Route 301 one evening, and I spotted this chamber, kind of a stone structure. And there was this light coming out from the entranceway. So I approached it, and then I could hear from behind the entranceway some kind of noise. It was a very unnatural noise. Something like maybe a motor or, I don't know, a mechanical humming of some sort. And I thought there must have been somebody inside or something, so I started to walk down in. And as I'm walking in, this overwhelming fear took hold of me. And in an instant, this invisible force just smacked me in the face and knocked me into a stone wall behind me. And I just kept struggling to get free, but I couldn't. I was just pinned against the wall, and this invisible force was just pounding on me. And the more I struggled, the tighter it was and the harder it was to get out, until all of a sudden, just as it had taken hold of me, it just disappeared and released me. So I started to make my exit. And just as I turned to run out the entranceway, I see this apparition, this ancient spirit wearing a daunting dark coat. And just as I'm about to run, I freeze, and then all of a sudden, it just disappears, vanishes into a white light of some kind. And then I got out of there. Whatever was down there didn't want me poking around. And I swore I'd never go back into the Hudson Valley chambers again.
The state of New York used to identify these things as colonial root cellars, but now, in the travel guide for New York State, they list them as possibly being of Druid origin. Now, one thing about these chambers, the dimensions of them, the dimensions are constructed using a unit of measurement that is not in use anymore, that was used during the Bronze Age. It's called the megalithic yard. It's multiples of 2.72 feet. All of these chambers are designed using the megalithic yard. Another interesting thing is that all of these chambers, the ones that I've studied, are not randomly located. They're not randomly built. They're built on areas of magnetic anomalies.
Well, I bought this property up in Brewster, New York. A really nice house on it, and I loved it, so I moved in. And the locals started telling me about a stone chamber that was on the property. There seems to be several of them around this area. They call them root cellars. So one day I was out walking around, and I was walking towards what was this stone chamber, and I suddenly spied this rock. And on this rock, there was really strange writings. Just really, I can't explain them. They were just strange. And suddenly, up above me on the hill, I saw these two figures in kind of black cloaks. And they started to come down towards me. I want to tell you, I got scared. And they came closer, closer, and then they suddenly stopped. And they were like talking to each other, I think. And then they continued on down towards me. I don't want to tell you, I was really frightened. And the next thing I know, as they almost got towards me, they disappeared. I mean, it was the strangest damn thing I ever experienced. Really strange.
I took careful bearings.
In the 1950s, America was UFO crazy. Even though the U.S. military insisted that it was a hoax, stories of an alien spacecraft crashing at Roswell, New Mexico, captured the public imagination and wouldn't let go. Hollywood responded by creating a raft of science fiction movies about these ships and their alien passengers. They offered us visions of what might happen if the aliens landed on Earth, some of them friendly and some of them much more menacing.
Now, if you're trying to come here to Earth, you have no alternative.
While people were flocking to drive-in theaters to watch Hollywood's idea of an alien invasion, a poor family of tenant farmers from a small town near Hopkinsville, Kentucky, were struggling just to get by. They had little interest in the latest Hollywood fads. But on one summer night, they say they experienced an attack more frightening than any screenwriter could imagine. An invasion of alien creatures.
Whatever happened that night, I don't know. I wasn't there. But it was something that terrified my father till the day he died.
There's many times he'd be telling me the story and just get cracked up and just turn white as sheet and just quit and not say nothing else about it. He just wouldn't talk about it at all.
This story happened in Christian County, Kentucky, on a little farm outside of Kelly, just 8 miles north of the city of Hopkinsville. It's a city that has a landmark event that belongs in the history books. The town recently celebrated the 50th anniversary of one of the strangest stories in American UFO history.
Hopkinsville in Christian County in the mid-1950s was principally a Protestant community of blue-collar and professional workers, a community not real stoutly committed to change in those days. Keep in mind also that this event occurred in the midst of August, when it was hot as the hinges of Hades. And so people tended not to get terribly excited about things. When it was hot weather, they would get even hotter. There was a police officer at nearby Shady Oaks restaurant, maybe 3 miles from Kelly. And this police officer indicated that sometime just prior to the reported landing of the spacecraft at Kelly, that he saw a series, maybe 3 meteors streaking northeastwardly across the sky in the general directional pattern of Kelly. It was a Sunday night, August 21st, 1955. At about 7:30 p.m., Billy Taylor went out to the outdoor privy, and while out there, observed a spaceship hovering 40 or 50 feet above the ground, and observed it land in about a 40-foot ravine or gully behind the house. Of course, concerned about it, he came on back into the house and told the members of the Sutton family whom he was visiting about this event, and Billy's reputation was noted for being creative, to put it in a nice way, and so the family paid a little attention.
About 20 minutes later, Lucky looked out the window, and what he saw would haunt him for the rest of his life. Coming up towards the house from the gully were several creatures unlike anything he had ever seen before.
When members of the Sutton family first saw the creatures approaching the house, they described them as little human-like figures, 3 to 4 feet tall, with pointed ears. But the most prominent feature of their entire makeup was the large, round eyes that appeared not to blink.
A few minutes later, one of the alien creatures came right up to the window and looked in. Lucky Sutton grabbed his shotgun and fired through the window. The face disappeared. Lucky and Billy Ray, now armed as well, decided to go outside to find out what happened to the creature they'd shot. As Taylor stepped out onto the porch, a huge hand reached down from the overhang, grabbed him by the hair, and tried to pull him up. Taylor managed to get free, and both he and Lucky retreated into the house and loaded their guns with ammunition. Now the 2 men started firing at these little beings as if they were in the fight of their lives. But what happened when they fired was even more terrifying.
When the firing started, these little creatures were knocked off their feet or would do a somersault and bounce right up and float off.
The battle shifted into high gear. Altogether, the 2 men estimated that they were being attacked by between 12 and 15 of these little men. Inside the house, there was absolute chaos. The women and children hid under the bed in terror, while Lucky and Billy Ray kept shooting at the advancing aliens through the walls and window screens of the house.
Stay there!
The terrifying attack went on for hours. Each time Billy Ray or Lucky hit their mark, the creatures would react by floating away, as if they were surrounded by an invisible force field, and then they would crawl back towards the house. At around 11 p.m., about 3 hours after the battle started, there was a brief respite. Without wasting a moment, Billy Ray and Lucky loaded everyone into cars and drove to the nearest police station in Hopkinsville to get help.
When the investigating officers arrived, they made a thorough search of the house. They were joined soon thereafter by personnel from the sheriff's office and even some military personnel from nearby Fort Campbell. A thorough search was made of the house and the grounds surrounding the house, and never did they find anything in the way of evidence pointing to the features of the story as indicated by the Suttons. The only real excitement of the night came when one of the soldiers from Fort Campbell unintentionally stepped upon the tail of a tomcat. Let's take a look at this scenario, this scene. All of these men, probably 10 or 15, walking around armed, looking for anything unusual, when all of a sudden one of the officers steps on the tail of this cat.
Other than bullet holes and the emotional state of the terrified family members, the investigating officers found no concrete evidence. Some reports suggest that police found a strange luminous stain in the grass where one of the creatures fell after being shot, but no one took a sample, and by morning there was no trace. They concluded their investigation and left. Nestled in the cleft of the Cascade and Monashee Mountains in British Columbia, Kelowna's lakeside setting draws visitors from around the globe. And for one summer night, in July 2003, quite possibly from outside our planet as well.
Brian Vike, Director of HVCC UFO Research, is actually monitors the UFO activity here in British Columbia and basically around the globe. 2003 happened to be an incredible year for the sightings. There was approximately 300 or more reports that year. I had a call from a lady by the name of Karina who lives in Kelowna here. She explained that her and her friend Linda were actually out star watching and ended up having an experience. And I tell you, she was very distraught when she called.
My friend Linda and I were sitting at the computer late the night before she left to go back to Abbotsford. She suddenly said to me, "Why don't we go stargazing?" And I mentioned to her that it was getting quite late. It was, around midnight. I was really tired. Could we possibly think about doing this the next time she was up? But she really insisted on going.
The women got into Karina's car and pretty soon found themselves on a back road, looking for a secluded area, shielded from the city lights. Karina was new to the area and wasn't sure where to find a good spot for stargazing. They soon found themselves on a road that runs between Kelowna and Vernon. There was no moon that night, so it was very dark. Karina stopped her car somewhere beside Kelowna's landfill. Linda got out and looked up at the sky with her binoculars. Karina pulled out a large spotlight she had in the car and pointed it down the road ahead of them. As Linda watched through her binoculars, she noticed a group of 3 stars in the shape of a triangle. She pointed them out to Karina. Neither of them could figure out what the lights could be. They both agreed on one thing. They weren't lights from a plane. There was no engine sound. The lights started to move ahead of their car, changing color from white to green. The air, which had been warm, turned musty and cold. It took a second for Karina to register what they were looking at. These weren't anything from this planet, staring back at them from out of the dark. They began to move towards the 2 women. They ran back to the car as fast as they could, but it was like moving through quicksand. It was as if the whole world around them was slowing down to a crawl. Karina remembers having a hard time getting her hands to open the car door. Once they were inside the car, she tried to get it started. The lights inside the car flashed on and off randomly. It was as if the car had gone crazy. Karina finally got the car started and sped back towards town. As they drove along, Karina remarked to Linda that she felt weird, as if electricity had been zapped through her whole body, as if by a charge from a battery. Linda took comfort from the fact that they both felt the same way. That's when she looked at the dashboard clock.
Visits by little green men and flying saucers. The stuff of science fiction or drive-in theaters, maybe? Think again. In 2003, with over 400 visits by alien craft or alien creatures in British Columbia, it seems as though we're under some sort of invasion. That July, 2 women from Kelowna, British Columbia, had a visit of the terrifying kind.
As they continued their drive home, Linda commented on the time. The women felt they hadn't been out of the car for more than a few minutes, but according to the clock, it had been almost an hour. Where did that missing time go? Suddenly, they both saw another large orb low in the sky on the far side of a field. Karina stopped the car. Could this be one of the same orbs they had seen earlier? Karina tried to convince Linda the orb was just a low-flying aircraft or helicopter. But even with both windows down, neither one of them could hear any noises from the mysterious orb. It started to move further away from their vehicle. To prove her point, that it was just a plane, Karina held up her spotlight out of the car window and flashed it 3 times directly at the orb. To her horror, it stopped dead in midair, then came flying down directly at them. Terrified, Karina panicked and took off down the road. She headed for home, trying to ignore the celestial object high above.
When I was contacted by Karina and Linda, basically I asked, what the object looked like and, how large, so forth. They said probably about the size of a full moon and definitely like a lime green, neon green in color. And this is from their vantage point on the highway.
The next morning, as Karina got out of bed, she discovered a large bruise on her left breast. She also felt nauseous and had severe head pressure. As she sat at her kitchen table drinking coffee, Linda joined her. Linda also complained about feeling sick, and suddenly, her right nostril started to bleed.
Oh man. Oh, that is wrong, really.
Karina grabbed a towel and tried to staunch the flow of blood. After they'd stopped the nosebleed, Linda left to take a shower and clean up. Karina's daughter then came down to the kitchen. She too felt nauseous and complained of a stuffed up nose. Then, just like Linda, her nose began to gush blood from the right nostril. Karina helped her stop the bleeding, and not wanting to alarm her daughter, she told her nosebleeds can happen when someone feels sick. But she suspected that her encounter the previous evening hadn't ended at the front door. A few kilometers from where Karina and Linda had their alien encounter, a man and his daughter, unable to sleep because of the night heat, had come out on their veranda to cool down. They noticed, to the south, an orb of intense luminous green traveling fast from east to west. The air went from warm to musty and cold, and all the normal sounds of nature at night stopped, as if someone had turned off a switch. They also reported the glowing ball landing somewhere in southeast Kelowna, the area of Karina and Linda's missing time event.
This last sighting was most important because the eyewitness pretty much verified the time, location the ladies were when they had their experience on the highway. Here at HBCC UFO Research, we act as a support mechanism for people who've had an alien encounter. Many times medical professionals scoff, at the whole idea, and they're always looking for a more rational explanation. And I can tell you, with this kind of attitude, there are a lot of people who are not coming forward who are going through these same experiences Karina and Linda did.
I think these encounters go back for decades for me. When I was 12, I discovered a scoop mark on my leg, which I have absolutely no explanation for.
A scoop mark is actually a small, maybe semicircle gouge taken out of somebody's flesh. Some of the abductees figure that, it is a surgical procedure, basically, maybe for tissue sampling. Also, maybe they've added something to keep track of them, such as a farmer would his cattle, a scientist would wild game, so forth. Also, this is a good way to keep an eye on the abductee, where their whereabouts are in case they want to pay another visit.
We are the largest commercial cave in Pennsylvania, a little over 3.2 miles of passageway in our cave. We are 46 stories deep. Many, many years ago, as the water seeped through the cracks of the cave, it eroded the calcium out of the cave and created the passageways that we have today. I've been playing in this cave since I was 13 years old, and there have been a lot of stories floating around in the area.
And one day I was working here in maintenance, and something happened to me that I never believed I would see. I was just finishing up on a project, and I was coming around the corner, and then all of a sudden I seen this here woman walking down in a white gown, very flowing white gown. And I'm watching her and looking, and I'm thinking, what's going on here? And all of a sudden I realized I must be seeing a ghost or seeing things. Then all of a sudden she disappeared. There has been a lot of sightings in this cavern. People have seen different types of ghosts. Now I'm a believer.
There are just over 3 miles of tunnels and caves at Laurel Caverns in Pennsylvania. It's a beautiful tourist attraction. Some of the caves go 46 stories underground. But this beauty, this incredible beauty, seems hard to leave, even in death.
The lady in white usually just kind of just there for a few moments, and then she disappears. And she's wearing some type of a white flowing outfit. We believe she may be Polly Williams. She was the young bride-to-be that was pushed off White Rocks by her husband-to-be. We also have a few other ghosts running around here. We have Norman Kell. He is the deceased owner of the cave.
A young tour guide was making his rounds one day when he saw a man standing high on the rocks in an area that was unsafe.
Sir, get down from there, sir. It's dangerous.
The man waved to him as if beckoning him closer, and then he suddenly appeared behind him as well. The figure on the rocks began to approach him, and the young tour guide fled from the area.
I think Norman stays around just to keep an eye on his place, to make sure it stays, like I said, a natural wonder, and he just keeps checking up on us.
The numerous ghost sightings prompted the United Paranormal Investigators to try to document these claims.
Our goal is to capture any kind of paranormal evidence that could prove a haunting here. We've been investigating for about 6 years. We run a multinational group. The temperature is always a constant in a cave, so any disturbances we get in the temperature would lean towards paranormal activity.
It's actually saying 42 degrees Fahrenheit.
What about up this way?
Down here. Up here, hopefully it's still 45. It's saying 43.
Average is about a 52 degrees year-round. And up in the other room, it should have been 52 also. Now, it does feel colder to me, and I'm down here a lot, and I do feel a lot colder than normal.
Okay, it's down to 0 now, but just a moment ago, it jumped up to a 5.6. That's pretty high reading.
Depending on what the average reading in the area is, say it's a 0.4 is the average, you want an increase of at least 10 to present any kind of immediate paranormal phenomenon.
Somewhere in these meandering caves, a bounty of stolen treasure is believed to be buried. The spirit of fugitive Frank Coley is often seen in a cave 30 stories below, warding off those who come too close.
My wife and I are from western Pennsylvania, and we were just riding around one weekend, and we saw the sign for Laurel Caverns, so we decided, oh, that'd be nice to go in there and look at the caverns, because we've never been there before. So we were inside, checking out the nice scenery and all, and all of a sudden, we saw this guy come around the corner, fairly large guy, about 6'4", maybe 300 pounds, and all of a sudden, he caught sight of us. And he started to come toward us, and all of a sudden, the guy just disappears. Apparently, this guy was an outlaw, and he used to hide his jewels there.
We have Frank Coley from the Frank Coley gang. We believe that he's kind of looking around for his treasure that he may have hidden in the cave. They used the cave as a hiding area at one point. We've had people who have taken pictures in the cave experience the orb-like things in their pictures and photographs. And this is where they usually see them, is at the top of the staircase there.
Well, he just got a whole lot of ecto.
We got a short conversation there.
That's a really good picture.
We got ecto, it's a form of spiritual energy. You got orbs, ecto, and you got the apparition. The apparition is the most strongest energy form. This is the second most base strong energy form. I believe it's very solid evidence that it's probably some form of energy, most likely spiritual.
You got an orb cabin? Where at?
You can see. There's no circle dots in that area. There's nothing like that. That is stronger than moisture or dust.
In the flash on here with the night vision, I thought I saw some kind of formation. It almost looks like there might be an orb flying down and kind of this way. I mean, I think the fact that we got 2 orbs over here, one on video and one on still digital, and then another orb back that way would definitely lead to something being here.
About 40 stories down, deep within the cavern, the apparition of a French soldier is often seen, still at his post, long after the French-Indian Wars. According to reports, this spectral soldier, a muscular man, has been known to fire upon observers.
Usually the French soldier has a long coat on, some shiny buttons, and he is seen mostly in the cave. He's been seen by just about everybody that works here. Yes, I was curious about this section because this is called the Devil's Staircase, and in the olden days, the early explorers used our third entrance, which is blocked off now, and they actually climbed down that crevasse right there, and it was a devil of a climb. It was very dangerous, so that's why they named it the Devil's Staircase. So I was curious to see if there was anything happening in this section right here, because it was a dangerous part of the cave.
Batteries depleted, camera shutting down. Brand new batteries just put right on into the camera, and it shut down. It will not take a picture. They didn't necessarily want us prying into their territory. The fact that sometimes it takes a picture with a flash and sometimes it doesn't tells me that it's obviously whoever's in here is having fun playing with my camera.
With all this water, there's something called white noise for EVPs. It's pure noise that's a constant that they can use to generate sound. So we do have a good chance of getting some kind of EVP here. So I'd go ahead and like to try a couple of those. Hello? How many people are here tonight? What are your names? Sounds like something's being said there. Right after the camera goes off. How many people are here tonight? Almost sounds like they're saying 2. Hello? How many people are here tonight?
Yeah, that's what I hear, I hear 2.
Right now we're hearing the recording I just did, and so far it's appeared that a spirit said there are 2 people here. I asked the question, how many people are here? And it sounds like somebody's saying 2. Overall, we've gotten several photos, video, and EVP recordings of spirits throughout this entire cave.
What really got to me was the EVPs. That was some really strong evidence.
I believe that this is definitely one night that I really enjoyed in gaining paranormal evidence. If anyone is interested into finding out if there's anything in spiritually or ghost-like, this is definitely one place to check out.
It's not only the caves that harbor the spirits of the dead. The grounds above Laurel Cavern are also believed to be haunted. In the late 1930s, a DC-10 airplane crashed into the campground above Laurel Cavern. There were very few survivors found amongst the wreckage.
I was camping right outside of Laurel Caverns, and I decided to take a hike. When I was coming up to a clearing, I saw these 3 guys. They turned to me, and I saw that they were gashed and battered and bloody. Then they started to advance on me, and the closer they got, I started to back up a little bit. They never said a word. They reached toward me, and when they got close, they just disappeared. It was the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced in my life.
The ghostly apparitions of plane crash survivors above ground and the myriad spirits inhabiting the labyrinth of tunnels below are manifestations of a mystery as deep as the very caves themselves.
One night I was driving home from work when my car broke down. Work takes me all over West Virginia. I was practically in the middle of nowhere. So I pulled over to the side of the road and popped open the hood. So I took out my cell phone. I tried to call the garage, the auto club, anybody that could help me out, but the cell phone just wouldn't work. So I got so mad, I slammed the hood. Next thing I know, there's this strange woman in front of me, dressed all in black, riding a black horse. I have no idea where she came from. I tried to call out to her to say hello, to see who she was, but she just wouldn't answer me. She just kept staring at me with these eyes and coming closer and closer on her horse. I just started to get really frightened. I started to run away. I ended up in a forest, and I thought it would be a safe place to hide, but she was there everywhere I looked. I ran behind bushes and around trees, and everywhere I looked, she was there. I don't know how she did it. I was really scared, and I started running, and then I fell. And I looked up, and there she was, coming closer and closer. And then all of a sudden, she vanished. She was nowhere. All of a sudden, my phone rang, which scared me half to death because it hadn't been working. It was my sister. She had called to tell me that our father had passed away of a heart attack. A while later, I was talking to my mother a little more about our Scottish heritage, and she told me about the myth of the Banshee. I usually don't believe in stuff like that, but I do now.
In the quiet community of Marrtown, West Virginia, a ghostly woman travels the night by horse to deliver her message. A message of doom to those of pure Scottish or Irish descent. She's nicknamed the Black Fairy, and all those who've seen her remark upon her blood-red eyes. The roads along the Ohio River have been famous for Banshee sightings.
Stephen Flanagan was driving home to his farm one cold October night, when in the middle of the road, blocking his way, he was met by an old woman on horseback. He honked his horn, hoping to get the woman to move out of the way. The horse paced back and forth, but would not move aside. All the while, the woman just stared at Stephen. Stephen waited impatiently, but the horse and rider did not move. Stephen got out of his car to ask the woman to let him pass. As he approached the woman, Stephen noticed her glistening blood-red eyes. Slowly, the horse and rider began to move away until they disappeared into the darkness. When Stephen got home a short while later, he found his wife had died of a massive heart attack.
The Banshee is known for her wailing cries. What she really is an Irish-Scottish attendant death fairy who attaches herself to certain Irish and Scottish clans. She wears a black shroud and she rides a horse. The Banshee actually has what they say is a loud keening cry that can be heard into the night as she cries out for her Irish and Scottish dead. Now, she doesn't cause the death. She's not an evil figure. She only announces the death through her cries. Thomas and Mary Marr were immigrants from Scotland, a place in Scotland that strongly believed in things like banshees and witches and ghosts. Mary Marr was an autumn bride, an ill omen among the Scottish. They had several children, but many of these children died. 10 years after the Civil War, Thomas Marr got a job as a night watchman near the Little Kanawha River. In Shawnee Indian, the word Kanawha means river of the evil spirits or river of death. During his job as a night watchman, Thomas Marr would come home early in the morning and he would tell Mary this strange story about seeing this shrouded figure on a horse, and he couldn't really tell if the figure was a man or a woman. As he would approach this figure, the horse would rear up and they would disappear into the mist of morning. On February 5th, 1876, Mary Marr awakened with a terrible feeling of dread. In the distance, she could see this shrouded figure on a horse coming up the road toward the Marr farmhouse. Slowly, slowly came this figure on the horse, and finally it came up to the front stoop. Beneath that veil across the face, Mary Marr could see these glittering red eyes.
Hello? Who's there?
And the woman didn't say anything for a few moments. And finally, that woman, that banshee, pointed a bony finger at Mary Marr and said, "Mary Marr, Thomas Marr has just died. Say your prayers, lady. I bid you well." The horse reared up, and the rider and the horse once again disappeared into the mist.
Unbelieving, Mary mounted her horse and took off to look for her husband. That was not the last the Marr family would see of the Banshee. Mary Marr lived to the age of 90, and when she died, the sound of banshees shrieking could be heard outside the house. A few years after Mary's death, one of the Marr children lost his hand in a gruesome accident. While family members watched over the boy, the desperate mother tried to stop the bleeding. As she wrung out the bloody bandages on the porch, she saw a woman on horseback slowly approach the house.
Who's there?
She had heard the family legends of the Banshee and knew immediately she had come to take her son away. Desperate, she screamed to the Banshee, begging it to leave.
Go away! Just leave us alone, please!
But it would not leave. She then resorted to prayer. With every fiber in her being, she prayed that her son would live, and this horrible figure would go away. Mary's prayer seemed to disturb the Banshee, and her horse became more and more skittish. Eventually, the Banshee went away. Unfortunately, the boy died a day later, and the Banshee was heard howling outside the house upon his death. The Marr family had learned what their Irish and Scottish ancestors had known for centuries, that the Banshee was, indeed, a messenger of death.
Can you get away from the Banshee's cries? I think not. When you hear them, you should take them very seriously.